Since the success of my last Left 4 Dead video, I wanted to do something similar, but also kinda different. I wanted to again work with Left 4 Dead, but change it into something completely different from what I tried to do last time. This time, I wanted to try and turn Left 4 Dead into the closest thing to a horror game I can get. This is going to be a little bit more in-depth than my previous one, as horror elements, while still subjective, I personally believe are less so, and so some of my changes and thought processes behind them will be explained to understand why I have changed them. As with my previous video, I wanted to try and do this without compromising too much of what Left 4 Dead is, and so most gameplay elements are off limits for modification, and the ones that have been changed have been done so without changing the whole gameplay dynamic of the game. At least I hope so. Anyway, without further ado, let's get right into this video. People that know me and have watched a fair few of my videos will know that I thoroughly enjoy a lot of horror games, with some of them being in my top 10 favourite games of all time. These include, but are not limited to, Cry of Fear, Dead Space, Resident Evil, Silent Hill, Alan Wake, etc. I don't want to list all of them because we'll be here forever. What I have noticed with a lot of these games, however, is that the horror itself doesn't rely on its enemies or its environment, but its actual gameplay, and this will eventually be related to Left 4 Dead, so please do bear with me. Dead Space, for example, is one of my favourites because of how it puts you and the protagonist Isaac up against the necromorph hordes. You'll notice that a lot of protagonists within these games are just regular people who have ended up in the wrong place at the wrong time. Isaac Clarke of Dead Space fits this description perfectly. His character is simply just an engineer sent aboard the Ishimura to do some repairs as the station goes completely radio silent. Obviously things aren't as they seem, and you have to use your trusty plasma cutter to mow your way through the station and the hordes that try to get in your way. The plasma cutter is one of my favourite weapons in the entire industry, and it's because how amazing the weapon is for simply just being a tool. That's it, the plasma cutter is a tool that Isaac has to use as a weapon in order to survive. That whole improvised weapon aesthetic is such a fascinating concept because it shows us that we have to just use what we can against the worst odds imaginable. That feeling that despite whatever is thrown at us, we can find tools to use to our advantage is exactly what keeps us playing. That small feeling of hope. And I wanted to try and encapsulate this feeling within Left 4 Dead. And while I don't think it's perfect by any stretch of the imagination, I think it sort of suits the game that this is. I scoured the Steam Workshop for weapons that would suit this whole feeling of improvised weaponry, but I couldn't find anything overly substantial for the guns, and so I had to kind of abandon that idea for them. The melee weapons, however, had a lot of this sort of feel to them, with shovels, pitchforks and frying pans, and so I wanted to find mods that added to that feeling. I don't think I did too bad. A lot of them feel really nice to use, and have the added benefit that they just feel like something you slap together. That feeling of satisfaction when you bash a zombie in the brains with a broken plank with some nails in really just gives you that small feeling of hope and makes you want to continue. As I say with the guns in the game, a lot of them on the workshop didn't really fit the overall aesthetic, and the ones that didn't really feel that good to use. With this knowledge, I went a slightly different direction that tries to emulate a different but similar sort of feeling. If for a moment we use Killing Floor 2 as an example, the weaker weapons in that game are weak because they feel weak, and what I mean by this is that the weapons themselves don't feel heavy, with powerful, huge levels of recoil and a mad, over-exaggerated muzzle flash with ear-destroying sound. They barely had any recoil, and they sounded a bit tinny and small, for want of a better word. To me, this is just what made them feel like they were borderline useless, and that got me thinking. There are a lot of different weapon animation sets with loads of different guns and noises on the workshop, and so again, I went searching for the ones that fit the most to this criteria of not feeling powerful. I didn't want to go too deep and change power levels on guns, and so I wanted to instill that feeling of powerlessness within the player by making them seem like they aren't as good as they actually are. With that goal in mind, I think I chose some really good choices. Another thing I decided to keep in mind throughout this search was that I wanted the weapons to feel almost exactly the opposite from how I made them seem in my previous Left 4 Dead video. With how Left 4 Dead is, a lot of the community don't really want weapons that feel insanely weak and unsatisfying to use, and that's completely fair. Not everybody is as weird as me and wants the game to feel like a horror game. This in itself presented a challenge as there weren't many guns that fit the exact bill, but I had another idea on how to possibly incorporate this into the game. I ended up mainly using this idea for guns that feel extremely powerful to begin with, so shotguns and sniper rifles and such like that. To counter this, I decided to use much older weapons for them. What I mean by older is essentially sort of the World War II era and before. Those weapons are obviously not used nowadays because we have made significant technological leaps that allow us to utilise more effective and efficient types of weaponry instead of the old wooden rifles and shotguns of yesteryear. I wanted to use these, however, as I wanted to encapsulate that feeling of it's better than nothing while using them. So even though they're still just the regular guns, they feel older and a bit more outdated and worse compared to some of the other weapons you may encounter. I especially wanted this feeling for the bolt-action snipers within the game, as there aren't really many on the workshop that just felt weak to use. So I decided to keep the World War II theme and make them sound strong. This is because I wanted the player to feel like they were in fact strong, but with how clunky the bolt-action rifles feel within the gameplay loop, it makes the player want to use them, but also not want to use them as they might get caught off guard. It's the little split-second decisions that bring out that small bit of stress that I've really wanted to capitalise on. As for the grenade launcher and the M60, I left them mostly unchanged, as they are very rare as is, and I wanted the player to feel some sort of reward when finding them. The lack of ammo they also share will also make you feel very frugal with your shots, which can make some situations rather stressful, not to mention that you are stuck with your secondary once you run out of ammo. I refuse to take credit for this, however, because this is just how those weapons were designed, but they sort of fit in with the whole feeling I'm going for, so I did want to mention them regardless. As I said in my previous video, however, these are all very subjective, and certain weapons for you might fit the bill over the ones I've chosen, so please feel free to use those instead. Before we go on to the next section, I just wanted to share another thing that I wanted to search for when looking for these weapons that you may or may not have noticed. I tried to intentionally steer clear of the Call of Duty Modern Warfare animation sets for weapons in the workshop, specifically the Modern Warfare 2019 onwards set. My reasoning for that is because those weapons feel extremely powerful and satisfying as is to use, hence why there are a hell of a lot of mods fitting this exact sort of description. They work extremely well for the gameplay loop of Left 4 Dead, and I use them personally on some of my mod packs as they just feel amazing to use. The other main reason I wanted to avoid these was because of how professional the weapon handling is within those animations. As I previously mentioned with Dead Space, Isaac Clarke was just an engineer who gets caught up in some insanely messy situations. He wasn't a professional at fighting his way through, and we can feel that as we control him. I wanted the weapon animations to give off a sense of that untrained usage, and what I mean by this is not having any weapons that felt like they were being handled by a soldier. So I wanted very amateur looking reloads and recoil absorption techniques. It was quite difficult accurately nailing that feel, as the weapons in Left 4 Dead 2 aren't the most realistic when it comes to reload times or recoil, but I think I did rather well in trying to counter this with the tools I was provided with. Regardless of this criteria, I think I got fairly close to having a sort of improvised skill feel to the weapons, while also having the weapons themselves feel fairly lackluster while still maintaining their level of lethality. With this chapter, I wanted to try and explain some of the changes I made to the game with how the world and characters are portrayed to seem more creepy and intense. I first decided to set my mind on the survivors, our lovable crews in which we follow through both games. I wanted to make them look a lot more dishevelled, with overgrown hair, dirty skin or ripped clothing. Not that exact look, but something that gives you that sort of feeling. For this, I decided to utilise the beta character models for the Left 4 Dead 1 survivors that make them look a lot more tired and beaten. I also utilised some similar looking skins for the Left 4 Dead 2 survivors. And I did this for both crews as I wanted to retain the original characters with clothing that would suit their personality, but would also make them look a lot more battle scarred and hardened from the things they've experienced while fighting through this world. This sort of feeling I was trying to go for personally makes the people I'm fighting alongside feel a lot less invincible, as they look a lot more exhausted and broken. It gives me a feeling when seeing all of us fight a horde that this could genuinely be our last, and the feeling of adrenaline you get from that is really refreshing, even for a game like Left 4 Dead. Games, especially horror games, rely a lot on immersion to try and give you the full effects of its intentions, and I think changing my perception of the characters slightly but noticeably increases this factor. I also wanted the same for the zombies you fight. I didn't want to change the common and uncommon infected loads, as they already fit with the world, and I think that the way they are portrayed is perfect, as different sort of infected pop up in different areas in which they belong. Changing the models for them would have simply removed a lot of that, and I wanted to try and stay away from that as much as I could. For the special infected, however, I had different plans. I wanted to make them infinitely more terrifying to encounter in the way that they look and sound, in order to really try and bring some stress out of you. I decided that I would change the special infected to look a lot more deformed and gory to add to the believability that the virus went completely out of control when changing them. I changed the models with different ones from games like Dead Space, and the body horror aspect of those enemies in that game is one of the reasons why I think it's so great. I also used a couple of models from Dying Light and Resident Evil 7, as again, I think the way the enemies are portrayed in those games are amazing. They also fit into their roles perfectly here. I changed the noises as well for a lot of the special infected, with sounds either fitting the model I used for them, or the whole creepy factor as a whole. This was also done in order to try and make me forget what certain sounds enemies make, and so I panic trying to decipher what exactly has spawned and is now coming my way. In some circumstances, it is definitely a lot more terrifying being pounced on by a volatile from Dying Light instead of a regular hunter. For the actual world itself, I wanted to make everything seem a lot grittier and darker without compromising too much of the game's art style and its overall fidelity. I installed a few mods that changed the way the world looks, with the main one being this: Time Psychscalar's aesthetics. For those of you that do not know who Time Psychscalar is, they are the developers of Afraid of Monsters Director's Cut and the more well-known and previously mentioned Cry of Fear. Cry of Fear is one of my favourite games of all time because of how the narrative ties into the world you are experiencing. I won't spoil too much of it, but it is an insane experience that I doubt I'll ever forget. But if you wish to watch some good deep dive videos on it before playing it, then I'll show a couple on screen now and leave some links in the description. This mod, however, changes a lot of the textures and adds a whole darker vibe akin to that of Cry of Fear. While Cry of Fear may not be the best looking game ever, the fact that it looks as good as it does for a game made on Gold Source is definitely telling, as I love how the in-game environment looks. It looks so nostalgic without compromising too much of its visual fidelity. And this mod sort of does that for Left 4 Dead 2. Having the overall experience of Cry of Fear provided with the gameplay loop of Left 4 Dead is a strangely surreal experience, and I think it perfectly adds to this whole vibe I'm going for as a whole. The last but not least section of this chapter concerns the audio. Those of you that frequently play games or watch TV or even just listen to music may notice that some parts are made exceptionally better through the use of audio design, and this overhaul is no different. I utilised quite a few audio mods to try and further immerse the player into the world they are currently experiencing. I wanted to try and make the characters have a bit more depth with it as well, to try and add some creepy parts in the world you explore. We go back to Cry of Fear again, with a couple of mods that change the music and ambience to be that of Cry of Fear. The game had exceptional audio design and definitely made some moments extremely creepy, so using that for this world was pretty much a no-brainer for me. I also added some small things, mainly for the survivors, such as adding an audible groan whenever you swing a melee weapon, to re-adding unused shoe cuff and sound effects, as well as making it so you scream whenever a charger takes you away. Little things like that that can make the survivors seem less perfect and less invincible, which can easily allow the player to insert themselves into the character of their choosing. As I said before, it's all about immersing the player in any way you can. As previously said with all of these, however, if these don't tickle your fancy, then please feel free to either cut them out or completely change them to whatever suits you. You know how earlier in this video we discussed me not wanting to change many mechanics from the vanilla experience? Well, in this chapter, this is exactly where we discuss that. As I said, I don't want to completely overhaul the way the game functions, and so I've just added a few things to spice up the gameplay and make things a lot more intense. I decided to change how friendly fire works to be a lot, and I mean a lot, more realistic. Basically now if you're shooting and a friendly gets in your way, a single shot from any gun is enough to down them, with another single shot being able to fully kill them. I thought that this would add a much slower gameplay dynamic, with people having to actually think about where they are and where they're shooting amidst all the chaos that is going on around them. I wanted to try and overwhelm but not confuse the player here, with the idea of you having to take multiple things into account while being bombarded. This took me a little while to get used to, but it is really fun once you know how to deal with it. This may be one of those though that you might want to miss out on if you exclusively play single player, as the bots are known to be incredibly stupid and just walk through lines of fire constantly. But I think that this would make an incredibly fun dynamic with a team full of people. I wanted to change how weapon pickups worked, and so I installed an add-on that makes it so weapon pickups are only just a single weapon. What this means, for those that are confused, is if you encounter a singular weapon on the floor that everybody can pick up as an ammo refresher, it now only spawns one at a time, and so only one person can get that weapon. It means you really have to think about who might need it the most, and then ration out found weapons among yourselves. This could really add an interesting dynamic to see how people become a lot more frugal with their ammo. With this, I also wanted to make it so melee weapons become a lot more viable throughout the game. I wanted them to be more optimal instead of optional, with guns still playing an incredibly important part in the experience, as you don't want these horrifying zombies getting close to you. Something like this can really make you want to plan your route a lot more meticulously, and can make some normal situations a lot more stressful, which is exactly what we're going for. Again though, I think if you exclusively play single player, this might not be the right one for you, as bots are known to be incredibly greedy when they want to be. Another major gameplay change I added was the ability to lose your weapons when you are immobilized. This means that on any occasion in which you are caught by a charger, strangled by a smoker, or ridden by a jockey for example, you lose whatever item or weapon you are currently carrying and have to pick it back up again. This can make situations in which you are faced with a special infected really damaging to your run. And this is one of those that can tie into the previous add-on, as with melee weapons being more viable, you need to obviously get closer to said infected. This can make a very interesting dynamic to the way you approach different encounters. This combined with the fact that most of the special infected have new sounds and looks, you may not know exactly what you're up against straight away, which can make a lot of encounters a bit more intense. Another gameplay change is the movement. I used this add-on here to slow the movement a noticeable amount. Still moving fairly quickly, so it isn't a crawl, but it's enough to make you think about how you manage encounters with enemies, as running simply won't be an option. The acceleration is also greatly reduced on the movement, meaning that moving feels a lot more heavier and it's a lot more tactile. This also adds to the survivors being exhausted throughout their journey, which can help further immerse the player while also adding a slower and more methodical approach to your way of play. The sense of urgency you get whenever you hear a horde coming or a special infected spawn perfectly juxtaposes this add-on by making you push against what you would normally do and instead think in a more rational way. I really wanted to make it so players can't run as much from encounters to an area that better suits them, and instead find a way to adapt in real time to whatever the game director throws at them. It's all about building stress and tension, and I think this combination of mods really adds to, extremely well to that. But as I say, this is all subjective, so you may disagree or have different thoughts. I wanted to keep a lot of the gore mods present in my previous video within this one. While gore alone doesn't make for an interesting concept in a horror game, when we see it, we instantly have a reaction that something bad is either about to happen or is currently happening. I wanted to keep that feeling intact while also keeping in line with the changes in special infected design. They work quite well in tandem, and the gore still keeps the game fun, albeit challenging. Another pretty big change I wanted to add was the first person animations. While a lot of you may interpret this to be from the weapons within the game, that is not the case. This changes the third person animations that you experience when you're being tackled by a special infected or using something like a medkit. That ability to turn your camera and make callouts when vulnerable is a valuable addition to the gameplay loop of vanilla Left 4 Dead. I wanted to try and remove this feeling by making things feel a lot more personal. Being able to see exactly what your character sees within these moments really further immerses you into your gameplay, and not being able to tell your teammates where things are also makes you a lot more careful in your approach towards certain situations you're faced with throughout your journey. The last change I wanted to share is one that a few of you might not enjoy, and that is completely fair enough. It was difficult for me to get used to, considering the game has no ADS and it can be rather fast paced. I opted to turn off the crosshair in the game to make things a lot more challenging. Having to be frugal with your ammo while also not being completely confident in your shots can be an interesting dynamic that makes for an exhilarating experience. All of this combined with the fact that you getting immobilized can be fatal for your runs means that there is a lot working against you. You have to decide whether it's worth wasting a couple more rounds that might prove to be imperative to your run later down the line, or let them get closer to you in exchange for a potentially easier shot. It all adds to the overall experience, and that is exactly what I'm trying to encapsulate. It also makes exploration a lot more important, as finding laser sights is going to be very, very useful for you. If you want a quick tutorial on how to turn the crosshair off in game, then I will quickly show you. If you watched my last video, then you learned how to enable and use the console when opening Left 4 Dead. This knowledge will be necessary to use again, so if you don't know how, then either Google it or look at my previous video. What you're going to want to do is really simple. Enter into a game. This can be any server, whether it's a private or public server, as this sort of change isn't a server-based thing, it's a client-side thing, so this can be done on any mode in the game. All you want to do is open your console and type in crosshair as you see it on screen, and then change the 1 to a 0. It's as easy as that. If you want to turn it on again, you simply repeat the process but change the 0 to a 1. The crosshair will reappear on your screen. As I say though, not everybody will want to do this, so please use at your own risk. And that's basically it for this video. I thoroughly enjoyed finding the mods and making this. I think I've consumed enough horror content throughout my life to the point where I can quite accurately say what makes something fairly terrifying. And this horror might not be the form of horror you expect, with loads of jump scares or whatnot. It's more about the psychological aspect and how to adapt to the altered game mechanics on the fly. All of this combined with a darker and grittier feel for your environment and equipment, you know, it makes for a really fun mixture of different mechanics that you can experience. I'm aware that this won't be for everyone, and I wouldn't dare try to make it so. Just like with my previous video, I wanted to try and see if there was a way in which I can alter a gameplay loop in such a way that it changes the experience without compromising too much of what made the vanilla game fun. I've definitely butchered the game, and I'm more than happy to acknowledge that, but hey, at the end of the day, it's just a bit of fun making stuff like this. I hope you enjoyed this video, and please leave me your thoughts or what you would change in the comments below. I'd love to hear what would make it better for you personally, and if you wish to play with this mod pack, then I'll leave a link in the description to the Steam collection where you can download the main mods used in this video. Thanks for watching everyone, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye bye guys.